Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel Geography videos. Today I wanted to talk about the one fatal flaw that every world map has, and that is the difference that comes between who actually owns a piece of territory and who should own a piece of territory. Google Maps takes a sometimes inconsistent view on this one that leads to the map being kind of misleading in some places, and let's be honest, for most of the world that doesn't matter, because when you're questioning where Sydney is, you don't have to question, is Sydney just legally a part of Australia, or is it like actually, de facto a part of that too? And the answer is, well, it's both, at least for now. However, when it comes to places like, say, Eastern Europe, where maybe there's some crazy border stuff going on in the region, maybe things get a lot harder to tell who really does own a piece of land versus who officially owns it. And what better example to use than Ukraine? Again, very tragic things happening there right now. However, Ukraine looks like this on a map, and this is what you might therefore assume is Ukraine's control and who is, legally in charge of Ukraine. However, as you probably know, things are going pretty wild in Ukraine. If we use the example of the Chernobyl power plant, yep, that Chernobyl power plant, Ukraine says it's been seized by Russia, and I don't know why you wouldn't believe them in this case. However, when you go and look at a map, you can see that Chernobyl power plant, which is just to the south of Belarus, as you can see, the Chernobyl power plant is very interestingly saying it's part of Ukraine still, even though it's currently controlled and operated by Russian forces. As you can see, it says it's part of Ukraine, and the actual, however, if you were to commit a crime there, would the Ukrainian police come after you, or would it be, the Russian police / military? I mean, if we're being honest, if you're committing a crime there, you're probably the Russian military, but you get the point that, like, who really administers this piece of land? And the answer is officially meant to be that, well, they're just occupying it. At some point, a treaty will be signed that, like, works out where the borders are and everyone agrees to go back to their side, and you might think that that's true. However, the current game of borders in Europe is never to sign that treaty and leave things up in the air for some time. Obviously, we can use Ukraine as the example where, like, okay, this part of Ukraine right here, that legally the whole world besides Russia still says that's part of Ukraine. As you can see, it very clearly has this jaggedy border, and it's actually just been Russian for all this time. In fact, when you look at invasion maps of Ukraine, you can see that Russia's just been stationing their troops inside of Ukraine for some time, but the world doesn't really go, oh, the Russia's invading Ukraine, because Russia has seized that as their territory. Indeed, the same thing is true for the separatist-held areas in the east, Donetsk and Luhansk. Both of these cities over here, as you can see, both these cities are part of Ukraine, but since 2014 or so, they've actually been held by their own separatist governments. Do you want to dive into that and the interesting thing about it? Something that I forgot to mention the last time I brought this up, because obviously I mentioned the east of Ukraine is very Russian, but what makes this so interesting is not just like, okay, well, they're actually pretty big cities too, needs to be mentioned, but also the reason that they are so Russian is because it's the main mining basin of the Donbass, and the reason that they ended up with so many Russians there is because Russia moved their Russian workers, because they have the huge population, into the territory, and so that muddies the waters even more about, like, oh yeah, I don't know who you listen to with regards to when a population has moved into an area, especially given the hypocriticalness that could come with literally most of the English-speaking nations around the world. Don't worry, entirely aware of that issue. However, I do also just want to mention that, like, yeah, you see why it's so hard to say, well, is this Ukraine, or is Ukraine this minus those things? At the very least, would you not argue that Ukraine is this territory minus the orange and minus the purple? And you might even go as far as to say, well, if Russia's currently holding everything, to the east of the Dnieper River, like, could you not argue that that's currently in their hands? There's this very tricky issue between who owns something and has their control on the ground and who says they own something. I mean, if the UK right now just says, you know what, legally we've signed a piece of paper with us, the rightful owners of the world's land, and now it all belongs to us, well, welcome to the British Empire circa 1850 or so. But you get the point that, like, we can't just say we claim the world and then actually claim it, because then, a world map could just say UK all over it and just be like, yep, we're good, we're done here. However, in reality, we could say that, but it wouldn't affect who actually controls, say, this piece of land right here, or this piece of land over here. This is still going to be administered by Kazakhstan, regardless of how many claims I, make on, Karangdi right here. That's always going to be a part of Kazakhstan, unless you decide to do something about it, right? And so that is why the issue between who legally owns something and who actually owns something is so tricky. And one of my favorite maps for pointing this out is the, to kind of show what's actually happening, is the apolitical world map. Sadly, this map is only 2 months months out of date now, but it's so far removed from what's happened because a lot of things have gone down those 6 months. But I wanted to show off this map anyway because it does show you the messy situation in Eastern Europe a little bit better, in my opinion. I mean, again, when you look at a map, you see that, yeah, the former Soviet states, especially, they negotiated their borders in 1991 when they withdrew from the USSR, and they haven't renegotiated those borders since, but that doesn't mean that they control all of that territory still because of some crazy shenanigans, and let's go through them one by one, shall we? First of all, we've got Moldova, which has a breakaway republic, which is the only country in the world, although it's not recognized as a country, that still uses the hammer and sickle in their official flag, which I think is maybe beautiful in its own way, or maybe horrifying in another way, you tell me. In fact, you know, I love to point this out every time. It's one of those wacky regions of the earth, but like you go to the capital Tiraspol and like there's just a statue to Lenin, right? There's a giant tank over here too. Wow, there you go. There's the monument to Lenin right there. Let's give it a peek. Let's look at your boy himself, and it's like, huh, that's an odd one. I mean, I guess it's not as odd as having Lenin's body like embalmed and on display, but you get the point. Like, this is a very Soviet vibe in place, right? Like, they have not gone over the collapse of the USSR. They still think their ex-partner might take them back, and honestly, given the way things are going, maybe they will. But you get the point. They're like, okay, so really Moldova looks like this on a map, but actually a part of Moldova, to the east of the river, is actually not a part of Moldova. However, that group never officially gained recognition from any country that has officially recognized itself around the world, besides, I think, Russia. And so, like, is it really a country? Not really, right? Like, it is. You have to go through a checkpoint to get into their territory if you want to drive through it, and they are the ones administering the laws, but also are they? You have to work out which one of those definitions do you want to use. Obviously, the same thing is true for Donetsk and Luhansk. On the map, you can see that they control their own territory, and there are fights by the Ukrainian army, there's fights by the Russian army these days to influence one side or the other in that one. But you can see that, like, well, you can argue they're a part of Ukraine still, and rightfully, at some point, they need to return to Ukraine, and that's why you keep the borders the same, to, like, make it clear, this is where things are meant to be. You are not meant to be independent republics, you are meant to be part of Ukraine, but also you can see how that happens, right? You can see how it becomes such a big deal, and, yeah, so, by the way, when we're talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it feels like we're picking on a particular issue that's very recent, but bear in mind, Russia didn't just invade Ukraine, right? Like, Russia invades a lot of countries, the first European war of the 21st century was Russia invading Georgia, and I'll admit, in 2008 when I first heard that, I wasn't too plugged into geography, my first instinct was like, wow, I can't believe Russia has taken the bold step of rolling tanks into, but you know, you correct yourself a few seconds later, and you realize it's New Georgia, not old Georgia, that they're invading, and you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty crazy stuff. And then again, as you look into it more, it's an invasion of Georgia, but it wasn't actually a war of Georgia. They invaded and they backed, really. They defended two republics that claimed their independence from Georgia against Georgia. So by international standards, and by, I think you should see it this way, they went into another country's sovereign territory to defend that same sovereign territory from the country that rightfully owns it. However, as far as the real world map of the world goes, who actually was in control at those times, it's two independent republics, as you can see right here, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And if you look at both of those places, and wait, should we zoom in the turn? There we go. But if you actually look at a map right here, you can see that, yeah, there are two independent republics, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and Russia was just going into those two places to defend them against the country who wanted to take them back. It's very interesting because I'm sure if the reverse happened, again, if there was a self-proclaimed North Ossetian Republic and Georgia went into that, Russia would not say, oh, don't worry, you're not invading our territory, you're just invading a separate republic. But you can see why realpolitik is a thing you need to know. That, like, oh, this is Georgia, but also there's some mess on that. And one of the interesting things is Google Maps eventually does update certain issues. So it shows Crimea, for example, as having a dashed line. Like, it's officially a part of Ukraine, but also, I mean, who's administering it right now, and is Ukraine ever going to get it back? Even if Ukraine joins NATO, are they getting their territory back? Probably not. And Georgia, it's like, well, this is Georgia, and this is also Georgia, and so is this, but who's really gonna get that territory back? And by the way, just I mentioned this in the last video, but I need to point this out. One of the wackiest, most surreal things in the world is that Russian troops just every now and then, they pick up the border signs and they just move them a few hundred meters more to quietly, you know, like shrink Georgia, I guess, to quietly expand these Russian-backed republics. The game that Russia is playing is a lot of playing around with this difference between who owns something and who owns something. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with that. And so the question here is then, okay, so if it's not just Eastern Europe. By the way, there's one more example I want to point out, because the craziest one of all of these, in my opinion, because I really want to get at how this is so possible in Eastern Europe, but not so common in the rest of the world. Because if you look at North America, it's not like, Mexico owns this, but really, wait, oh god, where have we ended up? Okay, so when you look at Mexico or the Caribbean, it's not like, oh, Mexico claims to own this, but actually there is literally in Mexico a part of the territory that is not is under control of factions but have not declared a formal government. Well, that's a problem. I don't know what's going on there. Who knows what that could be? But like you can see that, like, okay, generally speaking, countries have this exact same overlap between what territory they claim to own and what territory they really do own. There's some really funky examples of like places where that's not true, but it's usually tiny islands. Like, Argentina claims to own this piece of land right here, but according to, why is it so weird when I zoom in this way? But according to is this the state of Hawaii? That is the state of Hawaii. By the way, just want to point out, love the Hawaiian flag. Got to come up every time. Love that Union Jack in the corner. But yeah, if we go down to the Falkland Islands, you can see that, like, well, I mean, legally speaking, I want to say, by a lot of legal definitions, it's, part of Argentina, and they claim it, and a few countries back their claim, but it's actually part of the UK. Same with, I think the best example of, like, a case where my country is committing a direct crime, which is a fun thing to be able to say, by the way. Oh man, zooming into this map was a mistake. But, a place where my country committed a crime, and still is, you could argue, is in the British Indian Ocean Territory. It is, there's an island over here, close to Mauritius, that is officially, the UN has said, repeatedly, this is a part of Mauritius. It was unrightfully separated, and, you know what the UK says? Nah, we don't agree with that. And they control it anyway. Who really owns that land? Is it who the UN says owns that land, or is it the UK? And again, I'm using my country here, not that I think it should matter where I'm from, just to prove that, like, yeah, every country does a little bit off this. If you look at, the American history of just like, well, we'll just expand west and see what's going on there. Like every country has a little bit of like, well, we can exploit this difference a tiny bit, but the kings of it, the people who are doing it to the next level, is Russia. And the final crazy example I want to bring up, I should not have zoomed into this map. The final crazy example I want to bring up is Armenia and Azerbaijan. They are, of course, two separate nations which used to be part of the USSR. And have you ever heard of the Republic of Artsakh and the Azerbaijan region of, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. But have you ever heard of these two regions? Because let me tell you about it. There is, because there are lots of ethnicities that joined together with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was very cautious of ethno-states, they decided to play around with borders in the weirdest ways. So when the Soviet Union was established, they made an ethnic Armenian autonomous oblast within the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic. They could have just put it inside of Armenia, and you might be like going, oh, well, clearly the borders say, no, that's not possible. No, this is... They took a piece of Armenia that was very clearly separated from Armenia and gave it to Azerbaijan, and then, while it's all a part of the Soviet Union anyway, they can go, yep, so here's the plan, right? You stay with us, or you have to deal with that. And they did this to all the republics in different ways. If you look at the stands, try and explain these borders to me. Try and explain a logical reason you would make these borders that isn't just, let's make it really complicated to one day leave the Soviet Union, right? Like, well, I mean, this is Uzbekistan territory, this very strange strip that just doesn't even make any sense. If you look at it, literally someone scribbled on a map, and now those are internationally enforceable borders. But yeah, Soviet Union, it was a very, very big, multi-ethnic union in a time where that was something that was going out of fashion, and so you enforce it with a little bit of legal craziness. And so, I want to talk, though, not necessarily all about Russia and the invading situations today, because it's bad, it's sad, it's blah, 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 blah. However, I want to talk about the weird examples of how this happens around the world in places that aren't, Ukraine, or places that aren't Georgia, or a Russian neighbor, let's say, because the weirdest examples have to be Kosovo, which is drawn with a dashed line right here, Taiwan, which is not drawn with a dashed line, although it's an island, so it's a bit more complex. And then also Greenland over here. I want to talk about these 3 examples because Kosovo, I've been getting so many comments saying, oh, Toycat, it's weird how you oppose the invasion of Ukraine and yet you're in favor of Kosovo being a country. I go with the stance that roughly a third of member nations of the UN recognize Kosovo as being an independent country, and so it's roughly a third of a country, right? Because your legal status as a country doesn't come from owning a country, it comes from other countries recognizing that because we live in a weird world. Oopsie. But that's how that happens, right? However, as you can see, like, well, about a third of countries recognize it. It's a part of Serbia that decided to break away somewhat unilaterally, and it just so happens that the third of countries that back it also happens to include some of the more powerful and influential nations on Earth. And so you go, ooh, that is complex, huh? That is a hard one to deal with. And so, yeah, I would say Kosovo is the weird situation of a country where, yeah, of course, people have the right to self-administer, but do you have the right to just break away to do so? And the answer is, in this one case, yes. Maybe, sort of. And so, yeah, and if you look at the list of countries that don't support Kosovo, you see some major ones in there, like Spain or even Ukraine, being like, yeah, no, maybe not. Even Russia, just being like, that's not how international law works at all. And so, obviously, Google Maps says, well, a lot of people think that Kosovo is a country, but most of them don't. What do? We do the dashed border. Same. But then it's weirdly enough, if you look at Taiwan, Taiwan is a country that, like, if you're watching this video, you're from somewhere that says, yeah, even though China claims it, and even though, like, probably legally they've got the claim to, to doing so, pretty much locked down. Also, it's not China, right? It calls itself the Republic of China, and it claims all of this territory, but Taiwan isn't China. I mean, it's literally got a different name with it, a different city, and it's on an island, and, so on and so forth. But if you look at UN recognition of Taiwan, so, in blue, is Taiwan, in red is China, in light blue is countries that recognize Taiwan, and in, dark orange are countries that recognize the People's Republic of China. Every country in yellow only recognizes the People's Republic, red China, but also has some form of informal recognition, informal relations with Taiwan. And so if you look, very few nations on Earth recognize Taiwan. Even the one you're living in right now, I guarantee you that you don't live in a blue nation. I mean, 0.2% of you do, but most of you live in a... Is the Vatican City a country that recognizes Taiwan, but not China? Wait, one sec. Is that correct? What? That's the Vatican City, right? Why does the Vatican City recognize? Okay. Right midway through this video. Sorry, we need to Vatican. Taiwan has full diplomatic relations with 13 UN member states as well as the Holy See. When and why? I need to. Why? Due to the limited size of Vatican City, all embassies accredited to the Holy See are located in Rome, outside the borders of the Vatican City. So, there is a Taiwan embassy in Italy, a country that doesn't recognize, but still maintains links with the Republic of China. So Italy doesn't recognize Taiwan, but they have a Taiwanese embassy in their territory. See, now these are the fun facts that you gotta scroll through Wikipedia for. The Holy See is the only European state that has diplomatic relationships with Taiwan, and made efforts in 2007 but the bishops in the Catholic Church implied that they can't because the PRC. This is so interesting to me. The religion state mashup that is happening here, and you know what? I don't even know what to take from this. Anyway, sorry, little bit of a sidetrack. I can't believe why does the Vatican City recognize Taiwan? I guess because if you need more proof on how slow religion is, the fact that they wanted to recognize China and they're like, ooh, but do we have religious authority to recognize that? And it's like, shouldn't you be dealing with you guys as a country before as a religion? Whatever. Anyway, speaking of this, as you can see, only 13 countries recognize Taiwan, and so it's less of a country than Kosovo is. The reality is most of the countries are probably not recognizing Taiwan because of fear of retaliation by the People's Republic, right? However, it still proves the point that it's less of a country than Kosovo is, which gets great borders, whereas Taiwan, because of how we all kind of know, even though officially it's not, that it is, looks like this. But we also all kind of know that, Crimea, no matter how officially it's a part of Ukraine, and even if you ever look, we're gonna find it in this image. Usually they have a picture of Ukraine behind them and they show Ukraine as like having Crimea attached. Ukraine is very, very clear that this is a part of Ukraine and wait, you can't just take that away from us, guys. But also, you'd have to admit at some point that like, yeah, it's not going back, is it? This is a part of Russia now. We don't like the way they signed that, but until they sign a treaty or something. But then the final weird example is Greenland. There is no other territory on Earth which gets a full name and like a little country profile thing that comes out of it. If we try to go to another British Indian Ocean territory, you can see that like, actually, well, you know, I apparently it's just one that shows up from further. But you can see that like clearly when you click on Greenland, it gives you this weird thing. It even says it's an island nation, actually. That's weird. And like, sure, technically speaking, it's a nation within the Kingdom of Denmark, and so blah 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 blah. But you get the point that like, huh, yeah, that is weird, because Greenland has no international recognition, mostly because they're not an independent country. If we show you right here, you can see that Greenland was a Danish colony till 1953, but it's a semi-autonomous territory in the Kingdom of Denmark. It's just as, you know, I don't know, it's just as independent as Puerto Rico is. Well, Puerto Rico shows up in big letters too. You know, I'm starting to rethink this whole point. Puerto Rico shows up from so far away. Why does Puerto Rico show up here in this size when, like, literally the Dominican Republic is bigger, right? There's no question about that. But the Dominican doesn't show up till you zoom in way further. Or like Jamaica over there. Or, you know, I don't even understand Google Maps at this stage. Why, like, surely... I'm not saying they're recognizing Puerto Rico as an independent country, but they are making the implication that like, yeah, this is the important thing, and I guess this is the problem with being an American-focused company. As much as you can try to remove your bias, it's always going to show through with how you recognize some countries and not others. And so, how do you deal with the situation when Russia does inevitably make demands that they take some part of Ukraine away? How do you deal with those demands? And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how you deal with any of this. All I know is that we're living through a mess right now, and strap in and enjoy the ride. Also, just for fun here, you know, I just want to point this out. I had a pretty successful video talking about this, and you know, there's a little bit of weird feeling about like, well, why is a war in a very tragic situation breaking out one of the things that's leading to some success? No, not the greatest thing in the world, but you can see like the videos, it's going pretty well. 180,000 views, it's insane. 900 people apparently subscribed as a result. Hello, if you're one of those 900, thank you for staying here on the channel. But I wanted to just talk about this because I think it's interesting, and maybe you care about this, you want to see the inside baseball of YouTube. It's something I like to share. What happens when a video does very well? Because if you look at this video right here, this video also did pretty well by itself. You can see how a video does kind of well, and then as soon as another video does well, it really helps your previous video. So you can see yesterday at 3 p.m., which is, I think, roughly when this video got uploaded. We can confirm that, obviously. 3 p.m., oh, it's a little bit before then, that's when this video started to go like about fine. That video also starts to do really well. There's this funny thing called the waterfall where like, oh, even if you check this video out, you'll see there's a big rise all of a sudden because YouTube's like, these people must want more. And that is why on YouTube, you kind of need to have big videos that like blow up, even if they're like videos that were pretty quick, 20-minute off-the-top shots that apparently did pretty well. Because now all of these other videos, like these videos that are entirely unrelated to that one, are like starting to get recommended more because the algorithm goes, oh, you like you know, World War III starting? Maybe you'd like to know about how Denmark is really bigger than India, or maybe you'd like to learn about how half the world population speaks one of these languages. You can see all of these videos have an increase over the last few days as those videos do pretty well by themselves, and I just think that's really interesting. Also, technically speaking, I am now a war profiteer because I just made $169 from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I'm sorry, I'll do something good with that money. Just kidding. This is the second channel. There will be precisely 0 quality improvements. I'm just gonna go and enjoy a lovely kebab at my favorite place, which is Best Kebab. Probably not in Ukraine too soon. Also, you know, I like maps, and I don't know where I can fit this in a video, but I always forget about it. It's come up in like 2 videos in the past, because I forget about this island. This is the island, it's called Snake Island, although the place is called Bile, apparently, which is not a very pleasant name to call it. But if you look at Snake Island right here, or if you look at Bile, you can see like how ludicrously close this is to not only like another country, but like to NATO territory, right? Like, wow. This was actually taken by the Russians today, if I'm not mistaken. But like, Ukraine is literally bordering. I want to point this out. You know, Russia's whole problem is like, we don't like that if Ukraine joins NATO, we'll be bordering a NATO state. But here's the problem. First of all, Russia is already bordering 4 NATO states: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Russia literally has a border with 4 of them. And if Russia takes enough of Ukraine's territory, they're going to be bordering Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. I'm just saying, this was a terribly thought out decision. If you look at the map of NATO countries, clearly the smart thing to do is to give away some territory, you know, make some separate countries over here, and that way they won't border NATO states. I'm just saying, you gotta hire people like me, or save you big scale invasions of a neighbor that's gonna cost you some sanctions, when you can just make more republics. If you're Russia, you can do it. I mean, have you ever looked into the Russian republics? That might be a whole video by itself. Look at how Russia is subdivided. Every one of these republics has a weird story and history of how they got integrated in, especially the further east you go. Do you know about the Autonomous Jewish Oblast? Autonomous Jewish... Do you know about it? There's Jewish people don't even live there. What's going on here? Why is the picture a woman standing on a railway tracks? Is that a woman? Is that an old man with a beard? I don't know what's going on here, but yeah, look at this. This is a part of Russia. What's going on there? I don't know. There's tigers apparently though. Anyway, speaking of things that have tigers, this video was sponsored because, you know, when your country's being invaded by a foreign power and there's nothing you can do, you know what you're gonna need? You're gonna need today's sponsor. You probably should run and hide. I feel sorry for the loss of life that is occurring, and I hope that we work out a solution as a world, or at least the guy fighting stops fighting, or maybe we all just get along and that'd be good too. But for now, second channel, don't care, buy a tiger or something. Goodbye.